In this video, we're going to continue working on our edit quiz route, which is the route with our application that's going to allow us to create and update and delete quizzes from our quiz platform. Last time we built this simple edit quiz page and we hooked it up so that we have the use quiz once hook that allows us to now delete and update a document in our database. What we didn't do was build a user interface for interacting with that document. So that's what we're going to start doing in this video. We're going to build a form that is pre-populated with the quiz data that the user can edit and then save and potentially delete if they want to. So I'm working with what we used in the last video with some extra CSS that I'll probably explain as we use it. These will be in the starter files if you want to grab it. That's the only thing that I've added ahead of recording this video. And getting into it here, there are a couple of things that I want to do. So I want to build a simple form that takes the place of all of this stuff that we put on the page that allows us to edit the title, the description, and the difficulty of a quiz. And in the next video, I'll talk about how to build the whole form that allows us to edit questions and add and remove questions. So for this one, I just want to focus on a simple version of that that'll show you the flow. Once we get that form in place, we can hook it up to our database via our custom hook here, and we'll update some of the logic around saving and deleting so that we include things like who's the owner of the quiz and the timestamp for when it was last modified. And we'll wrap up with talking about security roles. So once we have this form, how do we make sure that only logged in users are allowed to create a quiz, or only the owner of a quiz is allowed to edit that quiz? So we'll button this video with that information. Okay, so getting into it here, we want to build a form. I want to create a placeholder form so we can start seeing the different components that we're going to have in action here. So I'm going to create a new quiz form JS file here that has a quiz form component. And this quiz form, let's just return a simple form with nothing in it for now. If I bring this side by side with my edit quiz page, and we think about the responsibilities here, the edit quiz page is responsible for the asynchronous logic that involves our quiz. So kind of displaying the loading spinner when the quiz is loading, issuing commands off to our custom hook for saving and deleting, and then our form is purely about rendering a quiz into these editable fields and notifying the page when it's time to save or delete a thing. So we're trying to separate these responsibilities out. So our quiz form is really just focused around the form actions. Okay, so our quiz form here is going to need a couple of properties. We're going to need to know what the initial data is for the quiz. So, we'll reach into the database, grab the quiz's data, and use that to pre-populate the fields in the form. We're going to need to know what happens when the form is saved and what happens when the form is deleted. So this is going to be an object with a bunch of data from the database, and we'll just have it default to an empty object if no data is specified. This is going to be a function that runs when we click the save button in our form, and this is going to be a function that runs when we click the delete button in our form. So our form doesn't have to know about how to save or how to delete. It's just going to call these functions that it's receiving as props when the time comes. So with our forms, we're going to want an onSubmit event handler here. And we'll hook that up to the onSubmit event from the form, which is triggered anytime you hit a submit button or a submit input inside of the form. So this is where we know that the user has initiated a save of the form, and it's time to call that onSave method. So we'd call onSave here. And with your forms, when we're doing client-side applications, a form, when you submit it, by default will try to refresh the page, and we want to prevent that behavior with the prevent default method that exists on these events. So our form here is empty, but it's hooked up with a handler for onSubmit, and we could actually, let's put in some test data here. So when this form is saved, we're going to send off the data from the form to whoever is giving us this onSave function, and that will then be handed off to the database and attempted to be saved. So it would have like the title and the description and the questions. For this demo, I'm just going to put an object here that has a title, but imagine it would have more things as we build out this form. So that's our save logic. Let's fill out some of the contents of the form here. Let's say we'll have a to-do here that we need to make fields for editing, and then let's put a button of type submit here for save quiz, and a button of type button for delete quiz. So the submit action happens when you have a button of type submit or an input of type submit that gets interacted with here. The form will get submitted and this will run. So that handles our save logic. Our delete logic, we need to actually say on click, call the on delete method. And our initial data, we're not using that yet. Once we start building the fields here that are editable, we'll go back to that initial data and use it. So now what we want to do is actually put this quiz form on the page. So I am going to blow away everything in here. Let me give myself a little bit more real estate. So let's keep the H1 and the main element, delete the rest. And we want to put the quiz form here. We will have to give it some initial data from our quiz, from our database. And that will come from our hook. So we could say quiz.data here. It needs to know how to save. So we got to pass in a function here for onSave. And we also need to pass in one for onDelete, which we created as props up here. So we can create const save quiz. So this is just an inline function, and delete quiz here. And these will be what we pass along to our quiz form so that it knows what to do when it is time to save a quiz or delete a quiz. And so that we can see something, let's console log saving and console log deleting here. And we'll come back and deal with the loading state in a second when that quiz, yeah, actually, you know what? Let's do that while we're here anyway. So, while the quiz is in its loading state, we want to return early and put a loading spinner on the page. And we can import that, which we've used a few times now from our common loading spinner. So we're going to return early during initial loading, or when the user doesn't have permission to edit this quiz. So we're gonna do a bit of conditional logic in here based on what the state of the quiz is at any moment in time. And we're gonna have two situations where we don't even want to get down to putting the quiz on the quiz form on the page. That's if we're in the loading state, or if we're in the situation where a user has tried to open up a page in our application and try to edit a quiz that they don't have permission to edit. So they're not the owner of the quiz. And we'll add that. So I'll put it to do here. Permission check. But let's get this up in our browser here and see what it looks like. We should hopefully be able to have a quiz form or have a form show up on the page with buttons that when we click on them, trigger logic that's over here in our edit quiz page. Pop open my console, saving, deleting. Excellent. So this can be a tricky concept when you encounter it for the first time, where we're passing along functions to our form so that it knows what to do in those different situations, the saving and deleting situation. But really all we're doing is making sure that at the right points in the form's lifecycle here, we are able to call save, save quiz here, that has access to our quiz hook, and delete, which also has access to our quiz hook. So this way, quiz form doesn't need to know anything about the database interaction or the use quiz once hook. It is just responsible for putting things on the page, handling events for when you edit those fields, and notifying edit quiz page when we're ready to save and delete. And let's actually capture this. So our data here is going to come through as a parameter, and we can say new quiz data, and let's console log new quiz data, and we should now see our test, our title, testing quiz form, show up in the console when we hit save. So saving, and then there's that data. So let's fill in this permission check before we go on any further. So the way that we've structured our data here is that each quiz identifies who the owner is by the user ID. So if I go into my authentication, I can see the accounts that I have created, and I can see my user ID here for my main account. And I'm going to copy that. And in here, what I want to do is make sure that at least one of these quizzes is set up to be owned by that ID, which I believe I already have here. So this quiz is owned by that user, which I'm logged in as, and this one and this one are owned by a fake user ID from our dummy data that we inserted in here. So we should only really be able to edit the JavaScript quiz here in our application when we're logged in as this user. These two are owned by someone else, so we shouldn't have access to edit those. So let me make sure that, let's go to the beginner JavaScript one. This is the one that my account is hooked up to. So this is the one I should be allowed to edit. And let's also pull up another tab here for one that I shouldn't be allowed to edit, like the music quiz. And if you forget where those are coming from, those are just injected via our script that can put some things into our database. So I want to be able to get to this page. I don't want the user to be able to get to this page because this is the one that I don't own here. So what we can do is do a little permission check. If the quiz status is success, so we've successfully retrieved a quiz from the database and the quiz exists, so that's something that our hook tells us, true or false. So if it exists, then we can start looking at the data. We can say if the quiz data dot owner ID does not equal our user state dot user ID. And let me make this full screen so it's a little easier to see. Return edit quiz with a message that says you don't have permission to edit. And then in quotation marks here, we are going to put the quiz.data.title. So that implements our check here. If we've successfully retrieved something, there is a quiz there, meaning we're not trying to create a new quiz. And the data that we have for that quiz says that the owner does not match from our user hook here, their ID. Then we can print out a little message to say, hey, you don't have access to this. And with that, I should be able to load this page successfully, the edit quiz, with my JavaScript quiz ID. And for this one, where it's the musical quiz, I'm not the owner, I can't access this. And we can see that again from here. The musical quiz, that is this owner ID, which is not what I'm logged in as, and this owner ID is the one I'm logged in as. This is my JavaScript quiz, so I can access it. And this also doesn't interfere when we go to like /new, which we've created last time, to allow the user to create a new route or a new quiz. All right, with that scaffold in place, we could build out the save and delete logic that we need here. And then we can actually dig back into our form and get the form up and working so that you can actually edit some of the data. So getting this up and running, our save and delete operations here, is also going to mean that we're going to need to kind of display some loading information to the user. Like when we've started saving, we need to let the user know. When we've started deleting, we need to let the user know. So we're going to work on these two methods, and then we are going to hook that up to some user interface so that another message appears on the screen to let you know whether you're in deleting or whether you're in the mode of deleting, waiting for that to finish, or whether the quiz has successfully deleted. So let's go here to the save method. And if we think about the save method here and think about our plan for our quiz originally in terms of the document, there was the title, description, difficulty, and then there was some information about the owner, like what's their ID. And that's what we can use for permissions, like only this ID should be able to access, should be able to update and delete this quiz. And then the owner's name so that we have access to it to display in our quiz listing. Then it has two pieces of information about when that quiz was created and modified, then tags and questions. So some of these things are going to be coming from our form, like our title, description, difficulty, tags, questions, but the owner ID, owner name, created at, last modified at, those are going to be supplied by our save method. So what we'll do here is we're going to create a new object, and we're going to copy over everything that we're getting from the form. And then what we want to sprinkle in is that other information. We want to add in the user information, and we want to add in that timestamp information. So the user information we have access to here from our hook. So we could say that the owner ID is the user state dot user ID, and the owner name is equal to the user state user display name. So the use user hook, remember we created here, returns the user ID. It tells us whether it's loading, signed in, and then also gives us the user object from Firestore, which has access to the display name. So with those two pieces of information, we can throw them in here, owner ID, owner name. And let's go ahead and console log our data so that we could see that printing out. So when we, go back to our browser here and we trigger save, we can see the data from our form, and then we can see this extra data that we're adding on top of it. Then we also need to know the timestamp. And there are a number of ways that we could do timestamp. Luckily, Firebase provides to us some ways to do timestamping. So if we head to the API documentation for Firestore, there is a timestamp class that is in the Firestore module that allows us to get a timestamp using the now method. It also allows us to get a timestamp from any date object that we want, which is really useful. And then there is also, under the field value module here, some ways for us to send along instructions to Firestore to do a few things. Like we can send an instruction to say, hey, add this to an array that's in the database, or remove this from an array that's in the database, or delete this field, or increment this field. And importantly here, there's one for a server timestamp. So we could either create our own timestamp here and pass it along, or we could tell Firestore that we want you to generate a server-generated timestamp. The advantage of the server-generated timestamp is that it's a bit better of a source of truth for time, because the user's time on their machine could be messed up or misconfigured, and the server timestamp will be from the Firestore service itself, and is being promised to be a truthful timestamp. So we're going to use that, which means that we're going to head to our Firebase class here and add another helper method, get server timestamp. And this is going to be a function that calls firebase.firestore.fieldValue.server timestamp. So this function gives us a value that we can insert into our data that just lets the server know you have to generate a timestamp. So with that, we can export this, head back here, and say last modified at equals get server timestamp, and throw that in here and make sure that I've got that imported up here at the top. So we should be able to click that save button and see, well, let me make sure that I saved this and refresh this. There we go. So we can see last modified at, and this is a special value here that lets the server know it is time to generate a timestamp. So we're not actually going to see any timestamp in here. This is just a placeholder that only gets filled in once we've talked to the server. Okay, last piece is that we want to add a created at time, but only if this quiz is a new quiz. And that's actually really easy for us to check with the quiz exists method. So we can say if, or the property, the exists property. So we can say if quiz does not exist, then our data, we can say created at equals the last modified time. So if we're creating something, it's going to be the same time as our last modified time. So for an edit where we save, we should just see last modified, but if we change this to /new and hit save, we should now see our created at time. All right, so then with all of that information, we can actually fire this off by doing quiz.set. And this is coming from our use quiz once hook. So remember, we created the set method, which would do a set on that document reference and allow things to be merged in, so that if we just specify the title, it's not going to override the rest of the data. And we also created that delete method here that did a similar thing. Get the document reference, tell it to delete. So this saving can now trigger something to happen in Firestore, and we are setting our title to be that testing title that we generate here, testing quiz form. So if I go and I trigger a saving, and check back here, we can see testing quiz form. And I can edit this back to what it was before, beginner JavaScript. And we could also test out the new. So if we go to a new one and hit save, we should see a new ID pop up here. One of these is new, that has that new data, has our timestamps for when it was created, along with the owner information. Great. So now we could do the delete logic. So if we come back here, the delete logic is actually even simpler. Let's get rid of these console logs. It is simply calling our delete method that we created in our use quiz once hook. And if let's do this side by side, be a little bit easier to see. So I want to go to this new quiz that I created here. I am the owner, so I should be able to access it. Give it a delete, it disappears from our database. If I create a new one, hit save, head to that one, should be able to delete it. So last piece of this, before we can actually make our form hooked up to edit this information, is to make sure that we display some information about the current state to the user. So we should, after this return early logic, we're going to create a message here. And if the quiz.status is deleting, our message will simply be a paragraph that says deleting. If the quiz status is deleted, our message should be deleted. And if something went wrong in any part of that process and our quiz status has an error, then our message will be and we could use our error message component here. Maybe we'll do that later. Just a message that something went wrong. Please try again. And we can put this message on the page here. So what we're doing, we're kind of handling some of the situations where we don't want the form to show up here and returning early. And then this message is going to conditionally show above our quiz form. So I don't want the form to just like disappear from the page while we're in the process of deleting or when an error appears, because that would mean that if the user were working on something and they tried to trigger something like a delete or a save and an error occurred, their quiz would disappear, all their unsaved changes would disappear. So we want to make sure this stays on the page and we just show an extra message on top. So we should be able to see that now. Let's go to /new and deleting, deleted. And that should work on every new quiz that we create. And we could see this side by side here. So let's grab Firestore and go to /new, save the quiz so that it shows up here, and then deleting deleted and it disappears. All right, so I know that seemed like a lot of mock logic, but this is basically what we needed to do on the edit quiz page. So as long as our form returns the right information here to save quiz in the form of a parameter, that will get dumped into our database. And as long as our form calls the delete at the right time, that will delete something from our database. So then when we're working on the form, it's really just a matter of thinking about the inputs on the field and or on the page and making sure that the values from those fields get passed along here. So let's start working on that. In our quiz form, instead of doing this dummy title here, let's go ahead and set it up so that we have an input field on the page, an input of type text here. And we'll call this title with an ID of title. And wrap this in a div with a label. And the label, we want to hook it up to our ID here. So make sure that the ID matches, and then we can say title. So we now should have something here, title with an input that we can type into, but we need to now take control over the value of this input and handle change events so that we can actually like start it out as having whatever the title of our quiz is. And anytime someone changes and then hits save, pass that value along to our database. So let's create here a form values state variable. And we will import use state from React so that we can set this up. And this state variable is going to have a title property that comes from our initial data. So remember, whatever we put here only runs or is only used when this state variable is created for the first time. So it's only going to grab the initial data at the beginning. And what we want to do is say that the title is equal to the initial data.title. So this would be coming from our quiz data if the quiz exists. And we can use the nullish coalescing operator to provide a default value. So if this is null or undefined, the nullish coalescing operator will return this in its place. So we're either going to use the title from our data, or this will be set to an empty string. And then we can say that the value of our input here is form values.title. And we can create a onTitle change handler that goes ahead and sets form values. And we're going to use the functional form here. So we're going to say, let's get the previous values. And we are going to return the previous values plus title set to be e.target.value. Oh, and let's wrap this in curly brackets for our function. And then we can say on change equals our on title change. So when this triggers, it goes to our form values and updates them, copying over the previous values here and updating just the title with whatever is coming from our input. And I'm structuring it this way because we're going to start adding the description and the difficulty here. So we don't just want one state value for title that's just a string. We want an object that has a field for each of the values in our form. So if I give this a save, I should be able to edit this, and let's say testing, editing. And if I hit save and pull up Firestore here, we should see Where is it here? Oh, you know what? This still says testing quiz. This is the new one that was just created. Let's delete this. What I forgot to do in the code here was make sure that we take the value of our title and send it along when we do our save. So instead of this dummy object that we were doing just for testing, we just take our state variable and pass it along. So now I should, let's bring these side by side, should be able to hit save, and testing editing shows up here. And we could continue editing here, test2, and hit save, and it updates the title and our timestamp because we're on /new. But I could also come in here, like say that we went away for a bit, then we came back and dropped in to pick up editing. We can save it, and that value gets thrown in here in addition to our last modified timestamp gets updated. And of course, we can blow that away with the delete button, and that's removed from our database. So this is great, this works, but as soon as we have to add another field, another text field to our form, this is going to get tedious. And so this is where what we're going to want to do is start breaking out these fields that we're using in our form to be a custom component that is reusable. So I'm going to create a new form components.js, and this will be able to use the styles, the form components.css here, which just has a few styles for labels and different fields and the focus style and errors that we'll be able to use in some of these components. So what I want to do is take this and turn it into a text input component that returns this. So it's going to give me an error, of course, because I have nothing called form values here and nothing called on title change here. And what we want to just start doing is replacing these things where we have values that are related to title, and where we have these things that are errors, we want to replace those with props. So this text input will give it a label, and that's what we will use in place of title here. We will give it a name, which will be our title that we use for the HTML4, the name, and the ID. We're going to need a value that we can place in the value, and an on change that we can place in the on change handler. So let's grab our label, and that gets inserted here. We could also add that as a placeholder if we wanted. Let's grab our name, and that is going to go in here, and here, and here. Our value goes in for our value, and the on-change handler goes in for our on-change. And then what we can do is export this text input component as a named export. And I'm doing this as a named export because we're going to add some more components to this file. And if I grab this, I should be able to go back to my quiz form. And instead of that giant block that we had, make sure that I import this, we can just specify the label is title, and the name is title, and the value is our value here. And we can grab our on change and put our on change here. So this line wraps up all of this, and so they should be functionally equivalent on the page right now. If I edit one, the other one is updating too. So we can go ahead and remove this one that we created with divs and inputs and labels. And now we could apply some of those CSS classes. So there is one class here for the form block, which just adds some margin below each block of our form. And I'm putting that on my div. Whoops. Then I have a class for the label and the input. So our label shows up as display block in a smaller font size above our input. And then this form field we can use to style our input to give it a different color border, padding, font size, width, and also some different focus styles. So this gets a class name of form label, and this gets a class name of form field. And that should look a bit better already. So even though this is currently stored in our edit quiz, because that's the only place where we have a form, this might be the type of thing that we elevate to our common area if we decide, oh, we're going to need a few different forms in multiple places in our site, and we want them to be consistent. But since we don't currently, it's fine for us to keep this form where it is related to just the edit quiz feature. So now that we've got one text input, it should be pretty easy to copy and paste this, and this is going to be a label of description and a name of description lowercase, and this is going to be coming from our description state variable up here. And let's update this so that whatever the description is in the quiz, it gets pulled in. And then we need to create a on description change handler here. And previously I showed you how to do this in the long form without using any implicit return statements. So this has brackets around it and has an explicit return. We can actually do this much more simply. We could do set form values, prev, and do a return, an implicit return of an object here that has the previous plus the description of e.target.value. So this line of code, same thing as this line of code. I'm just using implicit return here to return the object that I'm creating without having to have curly brackets and an explicit return statement. So with that, we should be able to say on description change here, which should allow us, let's pull these up side by side, to create a new quiz, new test. This is a description. Whoops. Well, it doesn't really matter because it's a test. Give it a save, and we can see there is our description and our title. And if we, let's see, where's the other quiz? Here's our other quiz that we own. If I grab this ID and load it in here, it should pull in that data. So beginner JavaScript and our description from our test quiz. Great. So this is working for new quizzes and editing existing quizzes. So long as we're the owner, we still should not be able to go to any of the other quizzes that we don't own. So this is looking good. Let's run through quickly doing a select input. So I'm going to create another one here called select input that's going to take in a label, a name, options, a value, and on change. And let's export this. And what we are going to return here is a similar structure where we have a div with a class name of form block wrapped around it, but the internal elements, instead of using an input element, we're going to use a select element. We'll still have our label, so I'm actually just going to go ahead, straight copy that here. Our select element, we are going to give the same kind of structure. The ID needs to match with our HTML4. And we're also going to use the name here for the name property. The value and on change also get applied to our select element. And then the way that you fill out what's in a select element is by creating option elements. And the option can have a value here. I'm just going to put a placeholder. So let's say the value is easy, and then what we specify here is easy, and let's put hard and hard. Obviously, we don't want these to be hard-coded to be easy and hard. We want this thing to be able to render any options, and we'll fix that in a second. I just want to get this on the page so that we can feel comfortable with the basic syntax before we go ahead and use an array here. So we'll create a select input. Oops. And we want this to have a label of difficulty with a capital D and a value of form values dot difficulty. We created that spot earlier, so let's go ahead and update this. The initial data dot difficulty, whatever's in our quiz, or with the null-ish coalescing operator, will default it to having a value of easy. So that should supply our value here. Let's make sure, I skipped name, so name should be difficulty, lowercase d, and then we need a change handler here. So we haven't created this, so I'm going to create it in a second, but we're going to call it on difficulty change. And then it's going to be almost the same thing as our previous one, except with difficulty specified here. And you may notice that these handlers are all very, very similar. We can actually very easily create a single on-change handler that all of them use, because we can actually read in from the event target. We can get the name of the thing, and we can get the value. I'll leave that to you if you want to explore that. We'll see a more advanced version of that in the next video. So this should be fine for now with 3 different handlers. We've got our difficulty and on change here. So we've got our input as a drop down, or our select element here with a drop down. Those 2 options are installed in it. If we check back in our form components, I forgot to apply this class. Let's apply this at the end here. So this gets styled nicely. So there's our input. The only thing that we need to do here is the input should get an array of options. And those options need to have a value and then the label that we want. So we're going to want something like this. Difficulty options is equal to an array of things that have a value. And this is the value that we get when we say e.target.value down here. And then let's also have a label, which is the thing that shows up for the user. Capitalize E. This doesn't have to match. This could be that we decided to store the value as a number. So easy is 0, and medium is 1, and hard is 2. In this case, I'm going to use strings, since that's what we had been using already. And this is going to be medium, hard, medium, hard. So these options can then be passed to our select input. We can say, here are the options that you should render. And then in our form component, instead of creating an option manually, or in a hard-coded way like this, we are going to take our options array and map it. So each thing that we get in here is going to be transformed into an option where the value is the opt.value and the label is the opt.label. So all we're doing is making these, but making them from the object that we just created in our quiz form up here that has a value and a label. Give this a save, remove these two, and I think we're gonna have to come back and add a key in here in a second, but we should see easy, medium, and hard showing up here. And if we check out our dev tools and look at our quiz form, we can see the state here should be responding to our changes, and the value that's showing up here is the lowercase version, not the label here. So this looks like it's working. I'm sure I'm getting a key. Yep. Anytime we're doing a map, we want to make sure that we apply a unique key, and the value for each option should be unique here. So we can use the option.value, and that warning should go away. So let's test this. We should be able to, let's go to create a new quiz /new, easy mode. This is easy. Give it a save, and our easy difficulty should show up here. And if I confusingly changed it to hard, that should update here as well. And if we were to leave the app, come back later, and go directly to that ID, it's pulling in whatever the latest version of title, description, and difficulty is. Good. Update it again, hit save, and those should update here. All right, so this, we can get rid of our to-do note from our form. We no longer need the to-do. Of course, there's a lot more that we want in this form, and it is just a matter of sort of time and effort to get the rest of those things in here. If you're following along with this but building your own application, this should be enough for you to run with to get things saved to your database. What I will show you in the future is how to use an external library called Formic to make some of this even simpler so that we don't have to manage these things, and we can actually do what's called validation and make sure that the description isn't empty and that the title is between 1 and 80 characters, which will be really powerful when we get to it. So let's do a few cleanup things here. We could add some headers. So quiz info, that's what we're doing up here. And then a header here for the questions that this is kind of a to-do thing. So that should give us some structure here. And I have a styling container for the buttons. So we could create a div around the buttons and apply that container of quiz form buttons, and then import the styling up here. Import quiz form, and that should center those buttons here. Change the gap between them too. And then the other thing that I usually do with a form is that when we click save, we want to disable the form while the saving operation is happening. And the way that I typically do that is just wrapping the whole form in a field set, which allows us to disable the field set, which disables everything in the form. So if we do this field set and put all of the contents of our form in a field set and say that disabled is true, that means that none of these can be edited and none of these things can be triggered, which is a really handy thing. Because we're in the mode of coming up with reusable components, I'm going to create a new form component here that takes in on submit and a disabled property. And we can just return a form with a field set inside of it. And the field set is going to be the disabled attribute will be controlled by our disabled, and our form, we can do on submit, hook that up to whatever gets passed in here. And then we just need to grab the children inside of this and wrap them in our field set. And I do have in the form components here, where is it? Yes, a field set wrapper that removes some of the default field set styling that's a little garish, and also styles it conditionally when it's disabled. So we want to make sure that we throw that on here. Oops, that should be a string. And then we should be able to, down here, export this, head back to our quiz form, and instead of using the form directly, we can use our new component, capital F form. And if we set it to be disabled here, we can see that that styling takes over and all of this is disabled from a user interface perspective. I can't edit any of these fields. And if I disabled false, those should be editable again. So when we want this to be disabled is while the saving operation is happening, and the form really has no idea how long that could be going on. That's really something that the edit page knows, because the edit page talks to the quiz hook, which knows what state we're in. Are we in the loading state? Or if we go ahead and check out what we set up here before, when we set the quiz, we go into the updating state. So we can actually let the form know, hey, we're currently updating. Go ahead and disable things until we're back into our success state. And that is really easy for us to do. Down here with our quiz form, we'll just add another prop. We'll say is saving is equal to quiz status updating. So this will pass in true anytime we're in that updating state and false otherwise. And then back in our form, we can say, we'll declare that we have this is saving prop, and we will disable when we're saving. So flip this over. We should be able to save. Oops. Oop. I can tell that as I'm clicking, it's refreshing the page here. And I believe that I've got an error in my code. Let's try that with a clean. Yeah. So the default is no longer being prevented here. So our form, we're passing in on submit. Let's make sure that we're actually using on submit. Okay, so that should now hook up is saving to the disabled state without breaking via typo the submit. So let's try that again. I'm gonna go create a new quiz here, edit quiz new. Testing, save, UI, test, medium, give it a save, and while that operation was happening, our form was disabled so that I couldn't try to save or delete things. And then let's see if we go ahead and change some of these things and hit save. While that operation was happening, our UI locked out. So this is looking good. One small tweak, it would be nice on the homepage when we're logged in to actually have a button we can click on that takes us to create a new quiz. Let's add that in to the home page, which is in our source homepage.js. And we can add a button in here. So we will wrap this in a link component. And this is coming from React Router. And put a button in here that says create new quiz. And this is a button, whoops, and a link that points to /edit quiz new. Or we don't even need the slash there. Oh, whoops. Do we need? Oh, no, we don't need the slash there. So that when I click it, if I'm logged in, that will now take me to our edit quiz page. We got some work to do on the dashboard in a future video because right now we don't have any way to see our quizzes and, head into edit mode, but we do have a way to create new quizzes here within our application. So if I use this, testing flow from home, blah, medium, give it a save, shows up in our database here. And then I could go ahead and delete it, and it gets deleted from our database here. So I think I will just quickly delete any of this test data that we created while working on this here so that we've got just clean data in our database. There we go. So we just have the three main quizzes that we injected in a previous video. And this video is running a little longer. So what I'm going to do is leave this structure where we're at currently. And I'll do a shorter video next that talks about setting up the security rules to enforce some of the things that we tried to enforce client side, like trying to make sure that you can't edit a quiz that you don't have permission to or permission to edit. This is something we're doing client side, which just is mostly a user interface thing to make sure that we let the user know if they've ended up in the wrong place. But it doesn't actually provide us security. Someone could, if they wanted to and had access to our code, could just fire off a save request using our use quiz once here and save any quiz and bypass our user interface. If we set up security rules, though, with Firebase through the Firestore rules editor, we can actually enforce that none of this is allowed on the server side, which is the right way to do your security rules. Okay, so wrapping up here, we did a lot in this video. We ended up creating a whole new set of components that allow us to create forms that are reasonably styled, and we composed them in our quiz form component here, which was purely just responsible for the user interface where we load up the current quiz and allow the user to edit it. So this user interface, it has nothing to do with the CRUD operations, the create, read, update, delete operations. It is just a user interface. And then our edit quiz page is the component that's doing the work of actually connecting the form to our use quiz once hook that knows how to update and delete things from the quiz and also load the initial state from the quiz. So we've got a lot to do still in terms of the quiz platform, but we've learned a really important thing in terms of our CRUD operations. We now know how to hook up our CRUD operations from our use quiz once to a user interface. So you, if you're working on your own project, will be able to do the same thing and get a form that is actually hooked up to your Firestore database. So that's it for this video. In the next one, we'll talk about security rules and we'll get those set up in Firestore, and then we'll start looking at how to build a much more complex form that handles all of the data that's in our quiz, like this questions array and the tags array. So that'll be coming next.